Tonight's meditation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to start with a guided practice here in this space, and then I'm going to invite you to go outside, to walk or sit out of doors, whichever you choose. If for any reason you want to stay here, that's fine. If you're on Zoom and you're able to, I would invite you to go outside as well. And I will ring a bell, so you don't have to look at your watch or wonder if you're late or when you need to come back in. I'll come out and ring a bell when it's time to come back. So one of the things that we've done over the past few years is to acknowledge that this land, this place, this space where we meet has been occupied by many, many peoples before us. And one of the things we do then is to just acknowledge the ancestors, our own ancestors, ones that we've known, ones unknown, beloved ones that have passed, to whom we owe our precious life. The Monacan Indians who lived here on the land of the Piedmont, and the earth beneath our feet, to whom we owe space for living and our continued existence. And may we remember all of these with gratitude, with compassion. Taking time to just settle in your own way in this meditation practice here and now. And I'll begin with a short poem related to birds, because this is their busiest time of the year. The phoebe sits on her nest hour after hour, day after day, waiting for life to burst out from under her warmth. Can I weave a nest for silence? Weave it out of listening, layer upon layer. But one must first become small, nothing but a presence, attentive as a nesting bird, proffering no slightest wish, no tendril of a wish toward anything that might happen or be given, only the warm, faithful waiting contained in one's smallness. Beyond the question, the silence. Before the answer, the silence. Aware of the breath coming in to the body, the belly. Maybe a deep breath, activating, brightening. Long, slow exhale through the nostrils, releasing. Feeling the body sitting here. Nothing to do and nowhere to go. Just sitting. feeling the palms, softening the face, the shoulders, and the belly. Sensing whatever can be relaxed, released. A tendril of a thought. Let go. Receiving what's here. Without preference. And if you would like to go outdoors to walk or to sit, let your body be bathed in the evening twilight. Listening especially to birdsong. Perhaps holding a stone or a blade of grass, or resting a hand on the bark of a tree, and connecting some way with the earth beneath you. And I'll ring a bell when it's time to return. We'll come back at about 7:40. May the wholesome aspirations and practices here tonight be combined with the wholesome aspirations of all beings to serve the well-being of all of us. Let's take a short break, 5 minutes. If you were here last week, you know that Anna Van Hoy talked about Sangha with us. She invited us to reflect on what Sangha means to us individually and collectively, and why we gather. That was her question initially, was what brings us here, or on Zoom, for those of you on Zoom, or to the noon meditation, if you attend that daily, or to the young adult Sangha group. Why do we gather? And some of you said that gathering is an opportunity for stillness. And some of you said it's a way to heighten the understanding of the way things are, remembering our Buddha nature, deepening insight, and compassion for ourselves, for the world. And for most of us, I would guess that gathering with Sangha is an opportunity really to take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and to hear something about the teachings and to be together in relationship with ourselves and with each other. And all of these are true. I saw a sentence recently in a memoir that said, all stories are true. And that caused me to pause and reflect. Is that true? All stories are true? And this notion that we each have our own perspective. And we often declare, yes, this is true, the way I see it. So all these reasons that we listed last week that we reflected upon, they're all true. They're benefits of why we gather, why we practice together. And I'd venture to say that all of them are aiming toward nonclinging, if you will, towards awareness, towards the true nature of things, of how life is. And I think what all of us are aiming toward with that non-clinging is moving beyond what tends to happen with each of us, which is kind of a self-absorption. And we wish to not be tied to that, to get beyond that, to see clearly, more clearly, the way things are. So that's the focus of tonight's talk, of aiming towards non-clinging and awareness. And as always, see what lands in your heart mind, and let the rest of it go. Thich Nhat Hanh says, the teaching is merely a vehicle to describe the truth. Don't mistake it for the truth itself. A finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. The finger is needed to know where to look for the moon. But if you mistake the finger for the moon itself, you'll never know the real moon. Now, those of us that are gathered here tonight in this space, we're like most groups, we're like most families. We're living in a climate of really deep changes. And there's a multiplicity of ideas about how things are or how they should be. And being human, we are inevitably bound to be reactive. We're bound to be confused. We're bound to be uncertain at times. We forget what's true. We lose sight of the path. And sometimes we mistrust ourselves or each other. And being human, we're confused at times about which teaching, which practice, or what action will serve our well-being or that of the community. And we want to get it right. That's our aspiration, to get it right, to be sure that it is wise, wholesome, it serves our well-being. And sometimes trying to get it right, we're trying so hard, there's such an efforting that we miss something. And there's a poem called The Way It Is, which maybe points to this somewhat. And this is what it says: over and over we break open. We break and we break and we open. And for a while we try to fix the vessel as if to be broken is bad, as if with glue and tape and a steady hand we might bring things to perfect again, as if they ever were perfect, as if to be broken is not also perfect, as if to be open is not the path toward joy. The vase that's been shattered and cracked will never hold water. Eventually it'll leak. And at some point, perhaps, we decide that we're done with picking our flowers anyway and no longer need a place to contain them. We watch them grow just as wildflowers do, unfenced, unmanaged, blossoming only when they're ready. How beautiful they are amidst the mounting pile of shards. So what's true? What do we know? Well, we know suffering. We know that one pretty intimately, no doubt. And we know that there's a path to the end of suffering. And we know also the teachings of the four, what's called immeasurables, the ways of being that benefit ourselves: kindness, compassion, our friends, our community. Sympathetic joy, and I love the description of sympathetic joy as drafting on the happiness of others. Drafting on the happiness of others. And equanimity. So those four: kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, are beautiful practices that benefit everyone. And then there's natural awareness, where the mind feels as though it's not clinging to anything, it's at rest. And with natural awareness, you notice that you are noticing, and that everything just seems to be happening on its own. And there's a sense of contentment that's not connected to external conditions. So if we're aiming towards non-clinging, towards awareness, our individual and our collective practices will probably depend on several factors. One being our abilities, or where we are on our journey with this, whether we began last month or last year or 20 years ago, may depend upon our learning style, our preference for listening or seeing, or a kinesthetic approach, and our own motivation. What's our aim? What's our intention? And like the Buddha, who worked hard and with a lot of faith to move along the path in his life, we are traveling one that requires diligence, it requires patience, faith, and compassion. And like the Buddhist students, we benefit generally speaking, from a profusion of understandings and practices. So then a question may arise, well, what about when I hear multiple or diverse or sometimes even slightly confusing or opposing teachings from various Buddhist traditions? What then? First of all, is to recognize that the human mind is curious. We want to know the answer. You might consider how often you've Googled to find the answer to a question or to determine what's true, because we have a tendency to ask, what's known? Who's right? And then sometimes if we pause, we see a bit of duality in that if one is right, are all the others wrong? But we also see that we at times need answers that direct the next step, that settle a question, and at least some degree of knowing a certain amount can serve us well in many, many arenas. What about the ultimate truth of the nature of mind, or the nature of awareness and freedom? What Buddhist practices or understandings answer these questions? It's possible that the thinking mind will never figure that out on the intellectual level. So even if you read multiple books, understandings, listen to talks about this, it may be that there's not a consensus, that there's not one specific answer. So the response might be, don't know, or who knows. What is true is that in Buddhist practice, all traditions converge on or speak about the truth of non-clinging, that the nature of awareness and freedom are release from clinging. So if we understand that as the basic premise underlying traditions, then we ask, well, what serves a mind? What serves to develop a mind that does not cling? Now, first, we may find that we need a grounding in some stability. And for many of us, mindfulness provides that. And then we may need that inquiry, that question, is this particular teaching or this understanding or this practice, is it a skillful means for liberating the mind? Is it moving in a wholesome direction, a non-harming direction, or is it going the other way? And for example, if you're caught in a lot of suffering, it's probably not too helpful to suggest that you rest in emptiness. That won't make a lot of sense. What's needed in that case may be to develop more clear mindfulness about, well, what's arising? How do I work with what's coming up right now? How do I work with the choppy waves of the ocean, that wonderful metaphor of the chop on top and the deep stillness down below? On the other hand, if we get fixated on suffering, and that's where we're tangled up and we continue to struggle with it, that may begin to solidify a sense of self. So in that case, if we hear something about natural awareness, may open us up to the transparency of self. And so what we're saying is that often it comes down to noticing what's going on right now and what would serve me right now in terms of practice, in terms of remembering what I already know. Sometimes staying with one approach works really well, and you might do that for a very, very, very long time. For others, it helps to move around a bit in terms of an understanding or in terms of your practices. So it's all a question of skillful means. Basically, you ask the question, if this is moving me in the direction of non-clinging, then it is a path towards a liberated mind. Sometimes we get caught in sense pleasures, in views, or in opinions, or the notions of the self. And these are all arenas where the grasping has a tendency to seduce us again and again. But there's a Zen teaching that says the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When attachment and aversion are both gone, the way is clear and undisguised. The practice of non-clinging is a great defense against all the feelings that rush to the surface in our daily skirmishes with what the Buddha called the 8 great vicissitudes of life. You may know those. I see some heads nodding. Pleasure and pain, gain, loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. Don't we find ourselves on those seesaws in life? And if you want 4 words to simplify, we find phrases that serve us, and this is one that might be helpful at times. This is from a 17th century Japanese Zen master who said, "Don't side with yourself. Don't side with yourself." So we notice that, oh, this is me, this is mine, this is how I see it, this is what I want, this is what's true. We're siding with ourselves, so don't side with yourself. What would that look like? Think of that as part of the one Dharma, because it enables us to practice selflessness. Emerging Western Buddhism is leaning in the direction of one Dharma. You've heard this phrase before. Joseph Goldstein has said that all the Buddhist traditions are rivers flowing into the ocean of the Dharma, each emphasizing one or another element, but together they weave the one Dharma of liberation. So nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine, according to the Buddha. He goes on to say, whoever hears this has heard all the teachings. Whoever practices it has practiced all the teachings. Whoever realizes it has realized all the teachings. And again, just noticing how that lands in the mind, heart, body. And I'll close with some words of an 11th century Tibetan Buddhist teacher from India. And these are his words of instruction. In the company of others, guard your speech. Whenever you are alone, guard your mind. Be of goodwill and without prejudice. Always generate the compassionate mind. Consider all phenomena to be dreams. Be grateful to everyone. Don't be swayed by outer circumstances. Don't brood over the faults of others. Explore the nature of unborn awareness. At all times, simply rely on a joyful mind. Don't expect a standing ovation. So we've got a little time now. I'm just curious to hear your own reflections, and maybe emphasis on where you are now in terms of your own practice. What metaphor or what teaching or what practice is serving you now in terms of nonclinging, in terms of what's true? And Brianna, I don't know if it's possible to let the folks on Zoom have their own conversation about this topic while we do so here. Okay, that would be great. But maybe we'll do this for 10 minutes and come back together. So just your own thoughts about what's true for you now. What have you found with regard to your own practice, what you're noticing? Yes, you do, so that we all can hear you, Kristen.
You mentioned the how the self kind of coalesces around suffering, or the sense of self. I can't even really articulate my question, but that's something that I've been coming across when I've been reading about. I don't know what my question is, but intuitively I understand that the sense of self is kind of gets reinforced by certain stories or storytelling mind, maybe. Anyway, am I making any sense?
Yes, of course. What comes, or what has come up for you with your reading about this? Is there some phrase or some understanding that makes sense that you're looking at right now?
That it's kind of keeping the sense of self sort of in place or stable, the whole conversation of, it seems to be around the conversation of suffering, and that if you keep sort of indulging in it, that kind of keeps you developing the taste for suffering. It just kind of keeps it, I don't know, that maybe the self is somehow connected to the stories that we tell ourselves about everything. And it'd be nice to be free of the stories. But I'm sounding really far out, I think, but that's what I've been looking at, and it's in my meditation practice. So I have an intention when I meditate about the clinging and the not clinging. And I think clinging is really, really subtle. It can be, yeah.
That's so true, is that the clinging can be very subtle at times. Yeah, and just notice, where I am clinging. Just that observation alone can provide some release. Just seeing where I'm stuck or where I'm circling round and round, and remembering too that there is a path, the Eightfold Path, as a way to practice with that, and then again just whatever current practice or teaching allows a release from that. That can be really useful. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on Kristen's question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying, Kristen, about how suffering sometimes causes us to, I don't know where to look here, causes us to sort of look inward and focus inward. And one of the, a teaching I really love that helps me with that is a Pema Chodron teaching where she talks about her experience was having a really bad toothache and getting really kind of caught up in herself and her toothache, and her doing, I think it's a version of loving kindness, I'm not totally sure what it's called, but where she has, but where she focuses on, she gets into a mind space where she breathes in all the suffering of all the people in the world who are currently suffering from a toothache. And she really just tries to imagine, like, who that might be, a child here, a woman there, a man on the street here, whatever. But breathe in all the suffering of people having toothaches. And then to breathe out relief to everyone having a toothache, including herself. And I just find that helpful when I'm in any kind of, pain as simple as that, or more in my head of loosening up that focus on self.
Thank you, that's really helpful. It's sort of a Tonglen practice, isn't it? Yeah, 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 it is. And what a wonderful way to extend beyond the self, to embrace the world with that. Thank you for that. Other thoughts, comments? Yeah, Jane.
And what I'm going to say is sketchy, but so I find this more being this retiree now and hanging with some older people. But I'm just very briefly, I'm going to try to say, so there's the human being and then there's the human doing. But I listen to others and have my thoughts, and okay, there's one drive to know more, to have my children know what their deceased grandparents, what their lives were like defining who is who, where you come from, who we are. And that feels so self-focused, but whether it's myself or other people, and I find I'm in the presence of people and there's talk about the mark we're making on this world, and that feels very self. And I will open up the newspaper and read the obituaries, and some of them are so impressive in terms of all these things that people did. And I think, oh, And what do I have to say about me? And so that is my little circling around of self versus being, and just being present and caring and loving. And anyway, and I do find it's intensified a little bit with age.
Thank you, Jane. Anybody else want to add? Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, Jane, I relate to the idea of, you said you're not working anymore, and how much of life, adult life, is focused on what we've done and what we're doing every day, and that sense of what happens when that stops, what's there, and it's scary to let go, and yet to be able to rest in presence and notice the clinging for a purpose or a mission or, and just really watch that. So I had a question. What is the unborn mind? You mentioned one of that was, letting go of the unborn. What is the unborn mind?
I think the phrase he used was unborn awareness. Yeah. Just this notion that I'm not sure I can explain it in the 2 minutes we have left. Next time, yeah. Next time, yeah. All right. So let's see if we're ready to join folks back on Zoom here. Brianna, are we back together? Okay. So thank you all for being here, for your presence, for your practice, and for your exploration, for just being, irregardless of what you're doing, have done, will do. Just your being, and just to give ourselves some compassion for this being human. Yeah. And don't forget the June practices. Tonight, go out somewhere and look at the fireflies. Go pick blueberries. Celebrate the summer solstice. Thank you.